You are not going to be anybody. Those words sliced through my skin like a thin blade, cutting deep without a sound. They came from Mrs. Bennet's mouth, my literature teacher in my senior year of high school, with the coldness of someone merely stating a fact. As if saying the sky is blue or that water gets wet. She said it out loud. In front of the whole class. I still remember the classroom. The windows open, the fan humming, and the eyes of 30 teenagers turning toward me like relentless spotlights. Shame swallowed me whole. I wanted to disappear. To vanish from existence. But I didn't cry. At least not there. I smiled slightly, pretending it didn't hurt. The mask of indifference was all that was left of me. And Mrs. Bennet, she returned to her desk, satisfied. As if she had put everyone in their place and mine was there among the incapable. Before we continue with the story, I ask you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This is very important to us. Thank you so much. My name is Haley, and this is the story of how a teacher who was supposed to inspire me became the symbol of the humiliation that shaped me. And, unintentionally, also the most powerful moment of my life. Back then I was the quiet girl. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I learned very early that my voice didn't matter. Daughter of a mother who cleaned houses and a father who disappeared before I learned to write, I grew up hearing whispers like, "She's hardworking, but," there was always a but. At school I went unnoticed. I was never an A student, but I was never a disaster either. I read secretly, scribbling thoughts in a notebook hidden at the back of my bag. I dreamed of writing. Of creating. Of telling stories. But I never said that out loud. Because even dreaming seemed like a luxury. Mrs. Bennet carried herself with impeccable posture, flawless red lipstick, and a look that melted away any attempt at daring. She was the type of teacher who loved to highlight the bright ones in the class. Children of doctors, lawyers, people who took theater courses or advanced English classes. And she made it a point to remind the rest of us that we were realists. On the day she humiliated me, I had just presented a poem. It wasn't anything extraordinary, but it was mine. I spoke with my heart in my throat, holding the paper with trembling hands. When I finished, there was silence. Some classmates even smiled. I almost believed I had done well. That's when she stood up, slowly walked to my desk and said in front of everyone, "You have a peculiar way of writing. A mix of innocence and despair. But honestly, Haley, you are not going to be anybody with that." Some laughed. Others just looked away. I swallowed hard. Class went on. Life went on. But something died inside me that day, the belief that I could be more. In the following months, everything turned gray. I graduated in silence, without a celebration, without pomp, without honors. I went to work at a coffee shop near my home and continued writing. On napkins. In small notebooks. At night on my cell phone hidden in the bathroom. I wrote about pain, about anger, about the burden of carrying dreams that the world insists on calling delusions. But I also wrote about overcoming. About new beginnings. About women like my mother who woke up at 4 a.m. and smiled as if the world were kind. It took years, and a lot more tears than I care to admit, before I believed that my voice deserved to be heard. I did a technical course. Then a distance learning college. I took classes gradually with scholarships and discounts. It was never easy. It was never glamorous. But every step, no matter how small, was mine. And while I worked, studied, and rebuilt myself, I was also secretly nurturing something. My blog. I wrote personal accounts. Fictional stories based on real feelings. Gradually the text began to spread. One reader shared with another. A teacher from another city asked for permission to use a text in class. A small publisher sent me an email. Suddenly, Haley, the girl who was never going to be anybody, started to be heard. I still remember the first time I received an invitation to speak at an event. It was a contemporary literature conference. Small but respected. I was afraid to accept. The insecurity was still an open scar. But I accepted. I carefully wrote my speech. I rehearsed at night in front of the mirror. And I promised myself, I wouldn't use this chance to attack anyone, but I wouldn't hide my story either. On the eve of the event, I received the list of guest speakers. And there it was, Margaret Bennet, author of school manuals, specialist in critical analysis of the new generation of writers. I felt the ground tremble. I took a deep breath. I smiled to myself. Destiny does not extend invitations by chance. On the morning of the event, my hands trembled more than I cared to admit. I applied a bit of concealer to hide the dark circles, tied my hair in a simple bun, and wore my best shirt, the one I bought after my first paycheck as a writer. My heart pounded as if it wanted to escape my chest. I didn't know what to expect when I saw Mrs. Bennet again. Part of me wanted to believe that she wouldn't even remember me. The other part hoped that she would remember. That she would feel every word she had once spat out with contempt as it came back bitter like iron. I arrived early. The main hall was still being set up. I grabbed my badge, which had a golden detail reading, Guest Speaker. And for the first time that title felt legitimate. Hours later the guests began to arrive. I was already in the backstage room waiting for my turn to step onto the stage. It was there that I saw her. Mrs. Bennet. She entered speaking loudly with the same upright posture as always, her gray hair styled in a seemingly unbreakable bun. She handed out calculated greetings, rehearsed smiles. And then our eyes met. It lasted less than 2 seconds. She froze. And then she looked away as if I were an unwelcome intruder in her line of sight. But I saw it. I saw the shock. The recognition. The hesitation. She knew who I was. She said not a word. She didn't approach. And that was better than any apology. In the schedule of lectures my name was set right after hers. When Margaret Bennet was announced, the hall was nearly packed. I watched from afar, peeking through a slit in the curtain as she talked about the importance of rigorously refining young talents. Her words sounded inspiring to those who did not know the venom behind her voice. But I did. I had lived it. I was one of her silent victims. Someone she tried to crush to feed her own ego. The audience applauded politely. She left the stage with an air of superiority, until at the side exit she had to pass right where I stood. She pretended to take a phone call to avoid crossing paths with me. At that moment the world seemed to spin slowly. There I was with my speech printed in my hand. And she, so haughty yet so small at the same time. Minutes later the master of ceremonies took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, now we have the pleasure of hearing one of the most impactful voices of the new generation of women writers. Please welcome the author of Unspoken Truths, a prominent columnist and a reference in narratives of overcoming, Haley. The applause was strong. I ascended the steps with controlled breathing. The light dazzled me a bit, but I knew she was there. In some seat of that auditorium, sitting upright with her gaze probably fixed on the floor. Good afternoon, I began, my voice firm despite my racing heart. First of all, I want to express my gratitude. Not only to the organizers of this event, but also to one special person. Someone who, without knowing, shaped who I am. Some whispers spread. I continued. When I was 17 years old, a teacher told me, in front of the entire class, that I wasn't going to be anybody. That what I wrote was mediocre. That my dreams were useless. And I believed her. For years I carried that phrase like a sentence. But today I am here to return that sentence to the place it should have never left. The mouth of someone who doesn't know the weight his words carry. The silence was absolute. No noise, no louder breaths. Not even Mrs. Bennet dared to move. That 17-year-old girl cried alone for many nights. But she also wrote. She rebuilt herself. Worked, studied, fell and got back up. That girl is here today, not to take revenge, but to show that no one has the right to extinguish the fire that lives inside another person. Applause began. Some spontaneous, others timid. But I wasn't finished there. To those who doubted me, thank you. You taught me to build a strength that cannot be bought, taught, or borrowed. A strength that is only found when everything around you tries to convince you to give up. And you choose to continue. In the end, I left the stage with a light soul. People came to congratulate me, ask for autographs, take photos. Sincere smiles, warm hugs. And in the middle of the crowd, her. Mrs. Bennet stood alone, holding a glass of water. Her eyes sought mine. There was something there that hadn't existed before. Perhaps regret, perhaps shame, perhaps just the acknowledgement that the world turns, and sometimes it turns too fast. She took a step forward. Opened her mouth. But I only smiled and walked in the opposite direction. I no longer needed to hear anything from her. My answer had already been given, with elegance, with truth, with the microphone in my hand. After the event, I spent the rest of the afternoon exchanging greetings, taking photos, and having conversations. So many handshakes, so many thank yous, so many teary-eyed glances that, for a moment, my mind disconnected from reality. It was as if I were living someone else's life, someone successful, admired, valued. But that was my life now. And I fought for every piece of it. In the taxi back to the hotel, I rested my head against the window. The city lights sped by like scrambled memories. I thought of my mother, of how many times she had hugged me at the end of a difficult day saying, "You are no less than anyone, Haley. They just haven't discovered your worth yet." She always believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. I picked up my phone and opened a message that had been saved in drafts for years. It was a text I wrote on one of my darkest days, when I seriously thought about giving up writing. I was 19 years old and had just received another editorial rejection. That night I wrote, "Maybe Mrs. Bennet was right. Perhaps I really have nothing special. But if I'm going to stop, let it be because I choose to, not because someone made me believe that I cannot." In that moment I understood. I never wrote for applause. I wrote to survive. To breathe when the world suffocated me. No. I was making other people breathe too. The next morning when I went down to the hotel cafe, I was surprised by an envelope at reception. No sender. Just my name handwritten in a firm, slanted script. I went up to my room and opened it calmly. Inside there was a sheet folded into 3 parts. It was a letter. Haley. You may think that this gesture is coming too late, and maybe it is. But I need to write because I didn't have the courage to speak with you yesterday. I remember you, yes. I remember your trembling voice reading that poem. And I remember what I said. And worse, I remember the intention with which I said it. It wasn't just about you. It was about me. About how frustrated, bitter, and unhappy I was in my marriage and in my own career. You didn't deserve it. No student deserves it. But you became something I never was. An inspiration. I saw you on stage yesterday and I felt what I had never felt as a teacher. Shame. You won. And if you can accept it, forgive me. Margaret Bennet. And my eyes stayed fixed on the signature for long minutes. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to tear the paper up. The other part felt pity. She was right, maybe it was too late. But she was also human. And unlike her, I wasn't interested in carrying venom forever. My victory did not depend on her apology. It was complete on its own. I kept the letter in my bag without yet deciding what to do with it. But one certainty was forming. My past no longer controlled me. I was ready for the next chapter. 2 weeks later, I received a call from a publisher in New York. They had watched my lecture online and were interested in turning my chronicles into a memoir. Something raw, intimate, and powerful, they said. They asked me to send them a sample. After hanging up, I went straight to my old notebook. Those handwritten texts with smeared ink and folded pages held more than just words. They held pieces of my pain and my healing. I chose to begin with the story of Mrs. Bennet, with the day of the poem, with the humiliation, but above all with the transformation. The book was titled, Nobody Saw Me Coming, and when it was released a year later, it sold out during pre-sale. I was invited to interviews, podcasts, events. My name began circulating not only as a writer but as a symbol of overcoming. Young people wrote to me saying that they too had been silenced, underestimated, ridiculed. I responded to every message, because I knew what it was like to be there, on the other side of hope, trying to hold on to what little self-esteem remained. One day, at a public school in the countryside where I was invited to speak with the students, a girl raised her hand and said, "How did you manage not to give up when everyone seemed to be right in saying that you weren't enough?" I thought for a moment before replying. Then I said, "Because I discovered that the most important voice wasn't theirs. It was mine. And that, if no one was going to fight for me, then I had to stand up for myself. Even if I had to crawl at first." She smiled. So did I. In that moment I realized. My stage wasn't just the event where I reunited with my teacher. My stage was the life I built afterward. And it was permanent. The launch of my book was a night I will never forget. The bookstore was packed. The chairs were all gone and people squeezed in, standing at the back of the room. Friends, readers, former teachers, strangers with teary eyes and books clutched to their chests. My mother was there in the first row, her eyes sparkling as if she were witnessing the child she once had to defend, now standing tall, whole, invincible. I held the microphone with the same hand that once trembled while holding a poem. I looked at everyone there and took a deep breath before beginning the reading of the chosen excerpt. "You are not going to be anybody," she said. The silence in the room was instantaneous. And I believed her. For a while, yes, I believed her. But what she didn't know was that inside me there was a flame. Small, almost invisible, but alive. And it was that flame that brought me here. Because no one who writes with truth remains invisible for long. At the end of the reading, the room erupted in applause. Some cried. Others shouted bravo. Me. I just smiled. A smile that held nothing of vengeance, only peace. That night, while signing books, a woman with her hair tied up, thick glasses and a beige coat approached my table. She looked hesitant yet determined. She placed the copy of my book in front of me, her hands trembling. My name is Elise. I was also a student of Mrs. Bennet. Her voice faltered. She destroyed my confidence. I gave up studying literature because of her. I felt a lump in my throat. I gently took her hand. Do you still write? She hesitated, then nodded with a shy smile. Then it's never too late. Words are always waiting for us. Write. And show the world. She left with teary eyes and I remained there, my heart warm. It was no longer just about me. It was about everyone who carried similar wounds. I had only been the first to turn them into a public scar. Months later, I received an invitation to deliver a special lecture at a state education conference. The theme? The silent impact of words in the classroom. I accepted immediately. And it was there, before hundreds of teachers, educators and school administrators, that I had the chance to say all that so many Haleys need to hear. A teacher's words can build or destroy futures. A phrase spoken carelessly can become a death sentence for a dream. But the opposite is also true. An encouraging phrase can change someone's life, can turn an invisible student into a beacon. And that is the power you hold in your hands. At the end, many came to thank me. One coordinator said she cried remembering the students she herself had ignored. A teacher told me he started to rethink the tone he used in evaluations. Change. That's what it was. What once crushed me now served as the seed for something greater. A year later, I was invited back to my old school. The current principal, a young, progressive woman who had read my book, thought it important to show the students that the past does not define anyone. The idea was for me to speak about writing, career, and, above all, how to transform pain into expression. I entered through the same gate where I once walked with my head down, in an oversized uniform and a heavy heart. Now I returned with steady shoes and upright posture, and my head held high as if carrying a crowd with me. Upon entering the auditorium, I saw several rows of students and teachers. Among them, seated in the corner of the second row, she was Mrs. Bennet. She looked visibly older, more fragile, with tired eyes. She saw me, and she looked into my eyes the way she never had the courage to do years ago. I simply nodded. Not with disdain, but with resolve. As I had already won. In my talk, I didn't mention her directly. But my story was there. Every step, every fall, every rebirth. And in the end, I left the students with one message. If someone ever tells you that you are not going to be anybody, smile. But smile inwardly. Because when you make it, and you won't need to prove anything to anyone. Your success will speak for you. And it will speak loudly. As I left, several students came to hug me. One of them said, I feel exactly as you described. Invisible. But no. I think I can be more. I told her she already was. She just needed to remember that every day. And then, as everyone was leaving, Mrs. Bennet approached. She held the same book that she had signed months ago at the bookstore, but there were no scribbles of mine in it. It was hers. I wanted to say that, she began but stopped. I looked at her kindly but firmly. I know, I replied. And that's okay. But now I have to go. I still have many people to inspire. And I walked away. Without resentment. Without hatred. Only with the certainty that the invisible girl had become the woman that no one ever ignores. Today, when I look back, I see a thin line between what almost destroyed me and what built me. And I am grateful, not for her having humiliated me, but for my decision not to sink any further. Because Haley, the one who was told she was going to be nobody, became the woman who inspires thousands. And no one can take that away from me. What did you think of this story of revenge and justice? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments and tell me which moment was your favorite. Would you have done something differently? Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and don't miss any of our stories full of twists and impactful endings.